Is that beer in your hand even Australian anymore? You crack open a cold one after a hard day's work. You see that iconic Aussie label, maybe a bit of green and gold, references to the outback or Queensland sunshine, and you assume you're supporting local business, drinking a beer brewed the way your grandfather drank it. But here's what the beer industry desperately doesn't want you to know. Those brands you've trusted for decades, the ones advertised during the footy, the ones your mates drink at the pub, the ones stocked at every servo and bottle across the country, they're not Australian anymore. They're owned by massive Japanese corporations who've quietly gutted the recipes, replaced real ingredients with cheap adjuncts and chemical additives, and are laughing all the way to the bank while you're paying premium prices for industrial swill. Today, we're exposing 8 beer brands that Australians need to stop drinking immediately, and I'm going to show you exactly what's in that bottle that's giving you shocking hangovers and why you're basically drinking chemicals, not beer. Number 8. Crown Lager. Crown Lager positions itself as Australia's premium beer, the sophisticated choice for discerning drinkers. The sleek gold label, the marketing that screams luxury and quality, it's all designed to make you think you're drinking something special. At $49.50 for a case of 24, that's about $2.06 per bottle. You're paying premium prices. But here's what they're not telling you. Crown Lager is made by Carlton and United Breweries, now owned by Asahi, a Japanese megacorporation that bought Cube in 2020 for a staggering $16 billion. Since that takeover, the focus has shifted from quality to profit margins. Crown Lager is brewed using significant amounts of adjuncts, specifically rice and corn, instead of 100% malted barley like traditional premium lagers should be. We're talking about roughly 30 to 35% of the grain bill being cheap adjuncts. Why? Because rice and corn are substantially cheaper than quality malted barley. These adjuncts create a lighter, thinner beer that lacks the rich malt character you'd expect from a premium lager. Real premium European lagers are 100% malt. Crown is cut rate, but the adjuncts are just the beginning. Crown Lager contains hop extracts instead of real hops, which means you're missing out on the natural oils, antioxidants, and complexity that whole hops provide. They use propylene glycol as a stabilizer. Yes, the same chemical found in antifreeze and aircraft de-icer. While it's considered safe in small quantities, it's absolutely not a traditional brewing ingredient. The beer also undergoes heavy filtration and pasteurization, processes that strip away not just potential off flavors, but also any beneficial compounds and much of the actual flavor itself. Independent testing has revealed trace levels of agricultural residues and pesticides in mass-produced beers like Crown, a direct result of sourcing ingredients from large-scale industrial suppliers who prioritize yield over quality. What makes Crown Lager particularly offensive is the price-to-quality ratio. At $2.06 per bottle, you're paying premium prices for an industrial lager that's been cheapened with adjuncts and additives. The only thing premium about Crown is the marketing budget and the fancy label. You're paying for the illusion of sophistication, not actual quality brewing. Number 7. Pure Blonde. Pure Blonde is marketed as the healthy choice, the beer for health-conscious Australians who want to enjoy a cold one without the guilt. Low carb, 85% fewer carbs than regular beer. The ads show fit, active people living their best lives. At $55.60 for a case, that's $2.32 per bottle, you're paying a premium for what you think is a healthier option. But here's the truth that'll shock you. Pure Blonde is one of the most heavily processed, chemically manipulated beers on the Australian market. To create a low-carb beer, brewers use industrial enzymes, specifically amylase enzymes, to break down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars that ferment completely, leaving minimal residual carbs. Sounds scientific and clean, right? Wrong. These aren't natural brewing processes, these are industrial additives that fundamentally alter the beer. The result is a thin, watery beer with almost no body or natural malt character. But because thin and watery doesn't sell, Pure Blonde compensates with artificial sweeteners to add perceived body and mouthfeel. hop extracts instead of real hops, and a cocktail of stabilizers and preservatives. The beer is ultra-filtered, a process so aggressive it removes proteins, micronutrients, and anything that might give the beer actual character or nutritional value. What you're left with is essentially alcoholic water with artificial flavoring. Independent testing has found residues of pesticides and herbicides in pure blonde, carried over from the industrially farmed grains used in production. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, has a transfer rate of over 80% from grain to finished beer because it's water-soluble. What makes pure blonde particularly deceptive is the health halo. Low carb sounds virtuous, like you're making a smart choice, but you're not. The artificial sweeteners, the chemical processing aids, the enzyme treatments, they all make this beer less healthy than a traditional naturally brewed beer. And here's the kicker. It's still 4.6% alcohol. You're consuming the same amount of alcohol as regular beer, and alcohol is where the calories come from. The low-carb claim is basically meaningless for actual health. Pure Blonde is owned by Carlton and United Breweries, which means it's owned by Asahi. At $2.30 per bottle, you're paying premium prices for heavily processed industrial beer with additives and artificial ingredients, all wrapped up in deceptive health marketing. You're not being healthy, you're being manipulated. Number 6. Great Northern. Great Northern has been the best-selling beer in Australia for 5 consecutive years from 2021 through 2021. It's everywhere. Every pub, every bottle-o, every backyard barbie. At $48.50 for a case, that's roughly $2.02 per bottle. It seems like decent value for Australia's favourite beer. But popularity doesn't equal quality, and Great Northern is a perfect example of marketing triumph over brewing integrity. Here's what makes Great Northern particularly problematic. Those clear bottles. They look clean, pure, refreshing in the marketing photos. But clear glass bottles are the absolute worst packaging for beer because UV light causes beer to skunk. Light interacts with hop compounds and creates off flavors. Every legitimate brewer knows this, which is why real beer comes in brown bottles or cans. So how does Great Northern get away with clear bottles? Simple, they don't use real hops. Great Northern uses liquid tetrahop extract, a chemically modified hop product that's light stable. You cannot package beer with real hops in clear bottles without it skunking within days. The solution is to remove all actual hop material and replace it with industrial hop extracts that have been pre-isomerized and chemically stabilized. These extracts provide bitterness without any of the aromatic oils, antioxidants, or complexity that real hops deliver, but the fake hops are just the start. Great Northern is brewed using the high-gravity method, where they create a concentrated wort, ferment it to high alcohol, then dilute it with deoxygenated water before packaging. Industry insiders report Great Northern contains up to 40% adjunct sugars in the brewing process, mainly rice and corn. The beer is thin, watery, and has a slightly syrupy mouthfeel from the adjuncts. There's no bitterness, just sweetness, because real hop bitterness has been replaced with extract. Home brewers who've tried to replicate Great Northern's recipe joke that it requires sugar, yellow food coloring, and stevia because there's so little actual malt or hop character to work with. Consumer reviews consistently describe it as having no depth, no character, just bland sweetness with a chemical aftertaste. What makes Great Northern offensive is that it's training an entire generation of Australian drinkers to think this is what beer should taste like: thin, sweet, and flavorless. Great Northern is made by Carlton and United Breweries, owned by Asahi. At $2.02 per bottle, you're paying for massive marketing campaigns and nationwide distribution, not quality ingredients or traditional brewing. The only reason Great Northern is Australia's favourite is because Asahi has spent millions convincing you it is. Number 5. Hahn Super Dry. Hahn Super Dry is marketed as premium beer for sophisticated urban drinkers. The sleek bottle, the minimalist design, the super dry positioning, it's all carefully crafted to make you feel like you're drinking something elevated and refined. At $55.60 for a case, that's $2.32 per bottle, You're paying premium prices. But here's the truth. Han's Super Dry is industrial lager with pretentious marketing, owned by Lion, which is owned by Kirin, another massive Japanese corporation. The super dry process involves fermenting the beer longer to convert more sugars into alcohol, creating a drier, higher alcohol beer at 4.6%. Sounds technical and craft, right? But here's what they don't tell you. To make this super dry process work, with their cheap ingredient base, they use industrial amylase enzymes to break down starches into fermentable sugars. These enzymes aren't natural to brewing. They're chemical additives used to manipulate the fermentation. Like all industrial Australian lagers, Han contains significant amounts of adjuncts, rice and corn instead of pure malted barley. We're talking 35 to 40% of the grain bill. The result is a beer that tastes thin and alcoholic with minimal malt sweetness or character. The hop flavor comes from processed hop extracts, not real hops, which means you're missing the aromatic oils and antioxidants that make beer actually taste good. The beer also contains stabilizers and clarifying agents to ensure every bottle tastes identical and looks crystal clear, because God forbid your industrial lager shows any signs of being an actual natural product. Independent testing has found traces of agricultural residues in Han, carried over from mass-produced grains treated with herbicides and pesticides. What makes Han Super Dry particularly frustrating is who it targets: young urban drinkers who think they're being sophisticated by choosing a premium beer. You're not. You're drinking the same industrial swill as every other mainstream lager, just with enzyme additives and a higher price tag. At $2.32 per bottle, Han Super Dry is overpriced for what it is. You could buy actual craft beer from independent Australian breweries for the same price and get real ingredients, real flavor, and real brewing craftsmanship. Number 4. 2 Haze New and 2 Haze Extra Dry. 2 Haze is marketed as the working man's beer, the tradie's choice, the beer for real Australians who do real work. At $50.50 for a case, that's $2.10 per bottle, it's standard mainstream pricing. But here's what makes 2 Haze particularly offensive. NSW once had a rich, vibrant brewing history with dozens of independent breweries making quality beer. Now it's dominated by 2 Haze, which is industrial lager owned by Lion, which is owned by Kirin, a Japanese corporation. 2 Haze New contains approximately 40% adjuncts in the grain bill, mainly rice and corn. That means less than 2/3 of the beer is actually made from malted barley. But what makes 2 Haze especially problematic is the caramel coloring. Natural beer color comes from the malt. If you're adding caramel coloring, you're compensating for the lack of real malt. They're literally painting the beer to look more substantial than it actually is. The beer also contains sodium benzoate as a preservative, which has been linked to allergic reactions and hyperactivity. Consumer reviews consistently mention headaches after drinking just a few tins or schooners of 2 Haze. That's your body reacting to chemical preservatives. 2 Haze Extra Dry takes all these problems and makes them worse with rapid fermentation and ultrafiltration. Independent testing has found herbicide residues, specifically glyphosate, which transfers from grain to beer at over 80%. At $2.10 per bottle, you're paying mainstream prices for below-average beer with chemical additives. The only reason 2 Haze survives is decades of marketing and brand loyalty to a name that no longer represents quality. Number 3. XXX Gold and XXX. XXX is Queensland's favorite beer, and Queenslanders will fight you if you criticize it. But mate, XXX Gold is absolute rubbish. At $48.50 for a case, that's $2.02 per bottle. XXX Gold is mid-strength at just 3.5% alcohol, which means even less malt and even more adjuncts. Industry analysis suggests XXX Gold is probably 50% malted barley and 50% rice and corn. Half the beer isn't even beer. The taste reflects this. It's like lightly flavored water with a bit of alcohol. But here's what makes XXX Gold particularly offensive. It contains high fructose corn syrup. You're literally drinking corn syrup beer. High fructose corn syrup causes blood sugar spikes and has been linked to metabolic disorders. The beer uses hop extracts instead of real hops and undergoes heavy filtration until there's virtually no flavor left. What makes XXX Gold especially problematic is it's positioned as a session beer, something you can drink all day. This encourages excessive consumption of nutritionally empty beer loaded with corn syrup and chemical additives. Regular XX at 4.6% has all the same problems. Consumer reviews describe it as urine-flavored water and too watery, too thin, too tasteless. One reviewer noted they feel a headache coming on every time they drink a few cans. XXX is owned by Lion, owned by Kirin. At $2.02 per bottle, you're paying cheap prices for cheap beer made with corn syrup. XX is training Queensland palates to expect flavorless, watery beer as normal. That's the death of beer culture. Number 2. Carlton Draft. Carlton Draft. Carlton Draft is one of Australia's most iconic beers. At $50.55 for a case, that's $2.11 per bottle. But Carlton Draft is made by Carlton and United Breweries, now owned by Asahi. And since that Japanese takeover, the recipe has been quietly cheapened. Carlton Draft uses approximately 60 to 70% malted barley, with 30 to 40% being rice and corn. Traditional lager should be 100% malt. These adjuncts create a thinner beer with minimal flavor. This is why Carlton Draft tastes watery. But the adjuncts are just the beginning. The beer contains propylene glycol as a stabilizer, the same chemical used in antifreeze. While considered safe in small amounts, it's not a traditional brewing ingredient. Carlton Draft also uses isinglass, dried fish bladder, as a fining agent. This isn't disclosed on the label. The beer is heavily filtered and pasteurized, removing flavor and beneficial compounds. Consumer reviews describe Carlton Draft as having a funky aftertaste that seems like chemical residue and the unmistakable urinal cake citrus twang of processed hop extract. At $2.11 a bottle, you're paying for brand recognition, not quality. You're paying for adjuncts, antifreeze chemicals, and fish bladder. Carlton Draft survives on nostalgia and massive advertising during AFL games. Number 1. Victoria Bitter. VB is Australia's most iconic beer. Hard-earned thirst. At $50.55 for a case, that's $2.11 per bottle. But VB is the worst mainstream beer in Australia. VB has all the same problems as Carlton Draft rice and corn adjuncts, chemical additives, antifreeze chemicals. Fish bladder, but VB is worse because it's marketed as a bitter when it's only 4.9% alcohol and has barely any bitterness. Real bitter beer should have significant hop bitterness. VB tastes of almost nothing, just slight sweetness and alcohol. Consumer reviews describe VB as having a metallic aftertaste and urinal cake citrus twang of processed hop extract. The recipe has been modified multiple times, always getting cheaper and blander. What makes VB the worst is the nationalistic marketing, the hard-earned thirst campaign, the Australian imagery, the association with tradies. It's all designed to make you think VB is authentic Australian beer, but it's owned by Asahi, a Japanese corporation. It's brewed with cheap adjuncts and chemicals to maximize profits. VB is the symbol of everything wrong with Australian beer: foreign ownership, cheapened recipes, chemical additives, and deceptive marketing wrapped in an Australian flag. Here's what you need to understand. The Australian beer industry is dominated by two foreign corporations, Carlton and United Breweries, owned by Asahi, and Lion, owned by Kirin. These Japanese companies control 85 to 90% of the market. They bought iconic Australian breweries, kept the Australian brand names, and gutted the recipes to maximize profits. The beer you're drinking is not the beer your grandfather drank. They use high-gravity brewing, brew concentrated wort at 20 degrees Plato, ferment it, then dilute it to 9.5 degrees. This produces inferior beer with poor foam retention. Australian regulations are pathetically weak. Breweries don't have to list ingredients. Beer can contain rice, corn, high fructose corn syrup, propylene glycol, caramel coloring, sodium benzoate, and fish bladder, and none of it has to be disclosed. The health implications are real. Chemical additives cause worse hangovers. Propylene glycol and preservatives contribute to headaches and nausea. If this video opened your eyes, smash that like button right now. Share this with every beer drinker you know, because most Australians have no idea they're drinking adjuncts and chemicals. Number 2. Little Creatures Pale Ale. Little Creatures from Fremantle was one of Australia's first craft breweries. Yes, they're now owned by Lion, but they've maintained their brewing standards. At $56.70 for a case, that's $2.36 per bottle. Little Creatures Pale Ale is brewed with 100% malted barley. No adjuncts. They use American Cascade hops, actual whole hops, not extracts. The beer is full-flavored, properly bitter, and has genuine hop aroma. This is what pale ale should taste like. While Lion ownership is concerning, Little Creatures maintain quality. The recipe hasn't been cheapened. At $2.36 per bottle, it's accessible craft beer available at most bottle shops. Number 1. Coopers. Coopers is Australia's largest genuinely Australian-owned brewery, still family-owned after 6 generations since 1862. When Lion Nathan launched a hostile takeover in 2005, over 93% of shareholders voted to remain independent. Coopers uses natural conditioning with live yeast in the bottle. Traditional brewing. No preservatives, no chemical stabilizers, no industrial additives. Just malted barley, hops, yeast, and water. Coopers maintains traditional methods, proper fermentation, minimal filtration, natural carbonation. At around $52 for a case, Coopers is competitively priced but delivers infinitely better quality. Coopers represents Australian resistance against corporate takeover. Every time you buy Coopers, you're supporting Australian ownership and traditional brewing. Stop supporting foreign corporations. Stop drinking chemical additives. Buy from independent Australian breweries. Coopers, Stone and Wood, Balter, Bent-Spoke, Batch Brewing, Fixation. If this video opened your eyes to what's really in mainstream Australian beer, smash that like button right now. Share this with every beer drinker you know. Most Australians have no idea they're drinking adjuncts and additives. Subscribe to the channel because I'm exposing more beverage industry frauds. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next video. Drop a comment below telling me which beer brand surprised you the most, or if you're switching to craft beer. I read every single comment. Together, we're going to demand better from the Australian beer industry. Thanks for watching, and remember, drink real beer, not chemical lager.